Ambassador David Park, had stood under the skylights of embassies from 16 different star systems, but none of those occasions felt quite like the celebration aboard the Celestial Harmony. What was supposed to be a final, polite gathering after tense trade talks had somehow turned into an unexpectedly pleasant evening. Queen Zaravel of the Zarati Empire had insisted on hosting a relaxed cultural exchange, and for the first time in months, David wasn't thinking about protocols, subclauses, or political pitfalls. "You know," Queen Zaravel said as she settled beside him on the ship's observation deck, "I imagine these negotiations will be far more confrontational." David accepted the crystalline cup she handed him, filled with a shimmering Zarati drink called Vela. Its taste reminded him of citrus and stars, and its effect was suspiciously similar to a strong human cocktail. "Honestly, Your Majesty, I expect the same. The briefings made your people sound a little terrifying." "Terrifying?" She let out a laugh that chimed like soft bells. "We do cultivate such an image. It discourages foolishness during negotiations." David could see why. Even sitting casually, she radiated an imposing presence. Nearly 7 feet tall, skin like polished silver, eyes that shifted color depending on emotion, and horn-like crystalline structures rising elegantly from her temples. Everything about her reinforced the image of a powerful monarch. And yet, stripped of ceremonial armor and surrounded by nothing but stars, she seemed surprisingly human in her curiosity and warmth. They talked, first about politics, then about philosophy, and eventually about anything that crossed their minds. The Vela helped. So did the relief of finally completing a deal that had kept both governments on edge for months. "The agreements we finalized will reshape trade across half a dozen sectors," David said, watching the starlight glint off the facets of her horns. "But something puzzles me. Your final concessions, they were generous. More generous than your advisors expected." Her eyes shifted to a thoughtful shade of deep blue. "Perhaps I value long-term relationships more than short-term advantage. Cooperation benefits empires more than exploitation." "That's a very refreshing attitude," he said. He hadn't meant the statement as flirtation, but the warmth of Vela spread through and made honesty flow more freely than usual. Actually, it's refreshing in general. She gave him a smile that seemed softer than any he had seen during the entire diplomatic mission. "I'm glad you think so. I don't have much experience with relationships outside of politics." Something in her tone made David look at her more closely. There was a subtle loneliness hidden beneath her regal poise. "Burden of leadership?" he asked gently. "In part." She took a slow sip of Vela. "Most potential partners approach me as a ruler, not as a person. Either they fear me or they want what my title can give them. That sounds incredibly isolating." "It is." Her eyes shifted to a subdued silver. "Sometimes I wonder how it would feel to be seen simply as myself. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the quiet honesty of the moment. Maybe it was the way the stars framed her profile. Whatever the reason, David felt the careful filters of diplomacy slip. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I've enjoyed being with you. Not the queen, the person. You're sharp, genuinely funny, and, well, surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who commands star systems." Her eyes brightened into a warm amber. The smile she gave him this time wasn't the polite kind. It was real. "That means more to me than you know, David." He should have stopped there. He didn't. "Honestly," he muttered, slightly embarrassed even as he said it, "you'd make a cute wife." The words hit the air like a dropped weapon. Queen Zaravel went utterly still. Her eyes flashed from amber to razor-bright silver. Conversation around them continued as normal, but David felt the atmosphere collapse into something electric and dangerous. She raised one hand, a gesture he didn't recognize, yet every Zarati nearby reacted instantly. "Your Majesty," he began, but she silenced him with a single elegant motion. "I accept." David blinked. "Accept what?" "Your proposal," she said. "I accept your offer of marriage." And in that moment, with an entire alien court watching, David realized he had just, completely by accident, proposed to the queen of the Zarati Empire, and she had accepted. "Director Martinez," David said, trying not to look as horrified as he felt. "I swear I didn't propose to her. I made a comment. A stupid one." The emergency meeting in his quarters felt less like a diplomatic debrief and more like an intervention for a man who had accidentally detonated an interstellar political mine. The human delegation had crowded into the room. Director Martinez, cultural expert Dr. Sarah Kim, 2 analysts, and 1 very stressed security officer, all wearing identical expressions of disbelief. "So let me confirm this," Martinez said slowly, fingers pressed to the bridge of his nose. "You told the queen of the Zarati Empire that she'd make a cute wife." David winced. "Yes." "And she immediately declared, publicly, that she accepts your marriage proposal?" "Yes." "And according to Zarati law, you're now engaged?" "Apparently." Director Martinez closed his eyes like a man watching his career dissolve. "David, do you understand what you've done? You may have created the fastest diplomatic crisis in recorded history." Dr. Kim, who looked like she'd been awake all night combing through cultural databases, tapped her tablet urgently. "Director, it's worse than a simple misunderstanding. The Zarati have an extremely strict verbal contract legal system. If a commitment is spoken in ceremonial context and accepted with witnesses present, it becomes binding." David stared. "Binding? Even if I didn't mean it?" "Intent doesn't matter," Kim said. "Spoken words carry legal weight equal to written treaties." David felt his stomach plummet. "So I'm legally engaged?" "In their culture," she said. "Yes. You are now the official fiancé of a monarch who rules dozens of star systems." Director Martinez looked ready to break the nearest piece of furniture. Kim hesitated before adding, "There's more." "Of course there is," David muttered helplessly. "Why wouldn't there be?" "The wine you drank. Vela." She showed a data entry. "It's used in Zarati courtship rituals. A traditional emotional disinhibitor." David stared. "I was drugged." "No," she corrected quickly. "You were served a recognized ceremonial drink. In Zarati society, offering Vela means a gathering as part of a romantic or bonding ritual. Speaking affection while under its influence is considered genuine, not impaired." "Oh, perfect," David groaned. "So in their culture, I propose while participating in an official courting ceremony?" "Yes," Kim said. "Which means Queen Zaravel genuinely believes you intended it." A soft chime sounded. Everyone froze. Dr. Kim whispered, "If that's the Queen, please don't say anything else binding." David opened the door carefully. A Zarati official, robed in garments that shimmered like oil on water, bowed with impeccable formality. "Ambassador Park, I am High Chamberlain Veltrix. Her Majesty requests your presence for the first compatibility evaluation." David blinked. "The what?" "The compatibility evaluation," Veltrix repeated patiently. "A daily series of meetings between engaged partners to determine emotional, intellectual, and political harmony." Director Martinez stepped forward. "High Chamberlain, surely, given the accidental nature of this engagement, some flexibility is possible?" "No," Veltrix replied calmly. "Royal contracts cannot be altered." The ambassador spoke a declaration. The Queen accepted. The Empire witnessed. The engagement proceeds. David's pulse spiked. What exactly happens in these evaluations? Shared meals, joint decision-making trials, personal conversation, problem-solving exercises, all essential to determine whether the marriage contract should advance to final bonding. David's voice cracked. "Marriage contract." "Yes," the High Chamberlain said, visibly confused at this needed clarification. "You are become a co-ruler upon formal bonding." Director Martinez made a faint strangled noise. David looked helplessly from the Chamberlain to his colleagues. "So, let me get this straight. I'm not just engaged to an alien queen. I'm potentially going to become co-ruler of her empire." "Correct," Veltrix said pleasantly. "Please follow me. Her Majesty awaits." There was no escape. David shot Dr. Kim one last look. She mouthed, "Don't speak any more compliments." He followed Veltrix down the corridor toward the Queen's quarters with one terrifying realization forming in his mind. A single casual sentence had just rewritten his entire life. Queen Zaravel's private quarters were far less intimidating than David expected for a woman who ruled an empire. The space felt elegant, almost serene. Crystalline structures shaped like living art, walls that flowed with shifting patterns of color, and soft ambient light that changed with her movement. It was alien, yes, but surprisingly warm. She stood waiting for him, dressed in attire more ceremonial than casual, but far less imposing than her diplomatic regalia. Her expression, however, was impossible to read. "David," she said with a calm, almost gentle tone, "I'm glad you came." "As if I had a choice," he muttered before catching himself. "I mean, I appreciate the invitation." Her lips curved slightly. Honesty is allowed during compatibility assessments. He sat across from her, trying not to appear as nervous as he felt. The chair immediately shaped itself to support his posture, which somehow made him feel more awkward. "Before we begin today's assessment," she said, pouring tea from a crystal pitcher, "you wanted to speak about last night." "Yes." David took a breath. "Your Majesty." "Zara," she corrected softly, "when we are not in public protocol." He hesitated. "Zara, I need to clarify something important. When I said you make a cute wife, I wasn't proposing. Humans don't. Well, we don't treat that phrase as a binding anything." "I understand," she said, though her tone suggested more complexity beneath the surface. "You did not realize the cultural implications of your words. So you agree it was a misunderstanding?" She studied him, shimmering eyes shifting toward a contemplative silver blue. "I agree you did not intend a formal proposal, but I also believe your words were sincere. They weren't meant as a contract." "No," she agreed. "They were meant as genuine affection." David blinked. "Affection?" "Do not deny it," she said gently. "Your tone, your posture, the sincerity in your voice, they were unmistakable. Even your species cannot hide emotion easily under the influence of Vela." "That drink should come with a warning label," he muttered. She tilted her head, slightly amused. "It is a ceremonial beverage. Its purpose is to allow genuine feelings to emerge without the barriers of formal diplomacy." He sighed. "So I walked straight into a cultural trap." Her eyes softened. "A trap implies malicious intention. I had none. But yes, the environment was designed to reveal truths rather than roles." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Were you hoping I would say something like that?" Zara set her cup down, hands folded elegantly. "David, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "What have you feared most since the moment I accepted your proposal?" He answered honestly. "That I might have forced you into something unwanted, that you'd feel trapped because of me." Her expression changed, not dramatically, but with a depth he hadn't expected. "That is a telling fear." "How?" "Because it reveals your instinct to protect my freedom rather than your own interests." She leaned forward slightly. "Many who approach royalty think only of what they stand to gain. You thought of what I might lose." David opened his mouth, but no words formed. Zara continued quietly. "Last night, when you spoke, you saw me, not my crown. You saw someone you enjoyed talking to, someone you admired. You spoke without calculation." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is for me?" He swallowed. "I didn't mean to put pressure on you." "You relieved pressure." Her voice dropped softer. "You reminded me what it feels like to be viewed as a person." David felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. "Zara, are you saying you want to continue this engagement?" "I am saying," she replied, "that I want to use these next 30 days to see what we might become without fear, without political performance, without pretending we are only diplomats. And if we're not compatible, then we dissolve the contract respectfully. No dishonor. No damage. And if we are compatible," her eyes shifted to a warm amber that made his breath catch, "then we will decide together what future we choose. Not the empire. Not our governments. Us." The idea should have terrified him. Instead, it felt strangely hopeful. Zara rose and extended her hand. "Shall we begin today's evaluation, David?" He took her hand without hesitation. For the first time since his chaos began, he realized something astonishing. He wanted to see where this might lead. By the end of their first full week of compatibility evaluations, David finally understood why the Zarati dedicated 30 entire days to assessing potential life partners. What he'd assumed would be stiff. Ceremonial formality turned out to be surprisingly immersive. Equal parts intellectual challenge, emotional honesty, and political teamwork. And every day, Queen Zaravel, Zara, continued to surprise him. "This allocation model you drafted," she said one morning as the two of them reviewed holographic charts hovering between them, "places unusually heavy investment in smaller frontier colonies." David nodded. Stability at the periphery supports the whole. If those worlds collapse economically, the Empire's core suffers. "An idealistic perspective," she observed, tapping her fingers lightly against the interface. The facets of her crystalline horns reflected soft morning light. Idealistic but strategically sound. That almost sounded like a compliment. "It was," she said, her eyes warming. "I'm learning that you don't advocate a policy unless you've weighed the consequences." He smirked. "That's very generous wording. My colleagues call it being stubborn." "Stubbornness," she said thoughtfully, "is only a flaw when one refuses to reevaluate. You adapt. That is rare in politics." The evaluation for that day focused on joint crisis resolution. Zara summoned a holographic model of a three-world trade dispute that had spiraled into political tension. They were asked to resolve it as co-rulers. "Is this hypothetical?" David asked. "No," Zara said with a faint smile. "This was an actual situation from last cycle. I am curious to see if your approach differs from the solution we implemented." He arched a brow. "So this is a test." "This," she corrected, "is an opportunity." For 2 hours, they worked through diplomacy, resource allocation, and conflict mediation, building ideas off each other in a way that felt shockingly natural. She challenged him without dismissing him. He questioned her without undermining her authority. By the end, they had formed a solution that neither would have crafted alone. Something balanced, innovative, and politically elegant. Zara sat back, eyes glowing amber with unmistakable approval. "This," she said, "is exactly what compatibility is meant to evaluate. Two minds producing more than their individual limits. It is gratifying." David looked at her, genuinely surprised at how proud her approval made him feel. "You're enjoying this," he said softly. "Of course I am," she replied. "It is rare to find someone who challenges me without hostility, who listens without submission, and who argues," she added with the faintest smile, "with intelligence." He looked down, suddenly shy. "I didn't expect to enjoy this either." Her expression softened. "David, may I be candid?" "You've been candid this whole time," he teased. "I mean, personally candid." He straightened. "Always." "When we began this process," she said slowly, "I admit I saw your accidental proposal as convenient. A path to avoid the arranged unions my counsel keeps pushing." She paused. "But that is no longer my motivation." David's heart lifted despite himself. "What changed?" "You," she said simply. "Or rather, my understanding of you." A long silence settled, filled only by the quiet pulse of the ship's engines. Then the door slid open abruptly. High Chamberlain Veltrix stepped inside with the solemnity of someone delivering critical news. "Your Majesty, Ambassador, communications from both Earth and the Imperial Council." Zara straightened, regal authority returning instantly. "Proceed." Veltrix bowed. Earth's diplomats expressed concern regarding the implications of a formal union between a human official and a foreign sovereign. They questioned Ambassador Park's neutrality. David stiffened. "Neutrality? I haven't abandoned my obligations." "They fear you may prioritize Zarati interests over human ones," Veltrix said gently. Zara's eyes flashed cold silver, a sign of irritation. "And the council?" Traditionalist nobles argue that a human co-ruler threatens cultural integrity. They question whether Ambassador Park can comprehend the depth of Zarati governance. Zara's jaw tightened. "Inform them that my choice of consort is not theirs to debate." Veltrix hesitated. "They also raised concerns about future succession and genetic compatibility." David blinked. "Succession? Already?" Zara sighed. "Ignore that. Their anxiety is predictable." David looked between them. "Both governments are uneasy because of us." Zara turned toward him, her authority shifting back into personal sincerity. Then we faced them together, she said, not as accident victims of circumstance, but as partners. For the first time, David felt the weight of political storm clouds gathering around them, but he also felt something steadier rising inside him. He wasn't scared anymore. He was committed. The joint communication session arranged later that evening felt more like a courtroom than a diplomatic call. Representatives from Earth appeared as holograms on one side of the chamber, stern-faced, tense, and visibly worried. On the other side flickered the images of Zarati nobles, their crystalline features sharp with skepticism. David stood beside Zara at the center, feeling the weight of two civilizations pressing down on them. Secretary of State Chun from Earth spoke first. "Ambassador Park," she began, diplomatic calm barely hiding her alarm. "We need assurance that your relationship with Queen Zaravel will not compromise your duty to represent human interests." David inhaled. "Secretary, if anything, this relationship has given me deeper insight into Zarati priorities. That makes me more effective as a representative." Chin leaned forward. "But will it make you biased?" Before he could respond, Zara stepped forward. "Secretary Chun," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "it is insulting to assume that marriage destroys independent judgment. I value Ambassador Park precisely because he disagrees with me when necessary." Chun blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Your Majesty, our concern is objectivity." "And mine," Zara replied, "is the assumption that personal partnership weakens diplomatic integrity. That is a flawed premise. Strengthened understanding between our species benefits everyone involved." On the Zarati side, a noble with jagged crystalline horns, Noble Kethvar, stepped into view. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone clipped with disapproval, "our concern is cultural preservation. A human co-ruler will lack the instinctive understanding required to guide the Empire's future." David straightened. "With respect, Noble Kethvar, no one understands every culture instinctively. Even Zarati rulers must learn the customs of new worlds as your empire expands." "You compare the learning of conquered customs," Kethvar said coolly, "to understanding the heart of our ruling structure." "Understanding comes from partnership," David countered. "From listening, from collaboration. Zara and I have already improved policies together through that process. Isn't that the point of leadership?" Zara nodded in approval. "Ambassador Park's perspective has strengthened my approach, not weakened it." More nobles chimed in, some worried, some curious, some openly dismissive. But over the next hour, the tone slowly shifted. Opposition softened into caution, and caution into grudging acceptance. By the time the session ended, Earth wasn't panicking, and the Zarati Council wasn't protesting. They weren't thrilled, but they weren't objecting either. When the holograms finally flickered away, silence filled the room. That, David exhaled, was exhausting. Zara turned to him with a small smile. "It was necessary. And you handled yourself with confidence I did not expect from someone who claimed to hate political confrontation. Fear is a good motivator." "Fear," she corrected, "is only effective when balanced by determination, which you have." He returned her smile and realized how natural this felt, standing beside her, not as a terrified diplomat, but as something more. Later, in the quiet of her private chambers, Zara motioned for him to sit beside her on a seating platform that molded to their shapes. "David," she said softly, "do you understand what tonight proved? That both of our governments think we're insane?" She laughed, a warm, chime-like sound. "Perhaps, but it also proved something else. Pressure did not divide us. It unified us." He hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Working together against political scrutiny had drawn them closer. "Zara," he said slowly, "I think I'm actually involved," she finished warmly. "Committed? Hopeful?" He nodded helplessly. "All of that." Her eyes glowed amber. The shade he'd learned meant happiness, so strong she was barely containing it. "There is something you should know," she said. "These 30 days are not simply to test compatibility. They were meant to give you freedom. The freedom to choose this without obligation." He blinked. "You would have accepted a dissolution if I'd asked?" "Yes," she answered quietly, "even if it broke my heart." Choice must come before commitment. David felt something tighten in his chest. Zara, I don't want to dissolve anything. Her breath caught. I think, he continued softly, I might actually want to be part of this. With you. Zara touched his hand gently, an intimate gesture in Zarati culture. Then tomorrow, she whispered, we decide our future. Together. And for the first time, David realized that his accidental proposal had given him something he hadn't known he needed. A partner who saw him, truly saw him, and wanted to build something real. The final day of the compatibility period arrived with a weight that David felt in his bones. 30 days earlier, he'd been a mid-level diplomat expecting a routine trade mission. Now he was standing in front of a mirror, adjusting ceremonial attire that marked him as a potential co-ruler of an interstellar empire. A chime sounded. Zara stepped into a room with no guards, no fanfare, just quiet confidence. Her ceremonial garment shimmered with fractal silver patterns, her eyes glowing a calm, steady blue. David, she said softly, are you ready? As ready as a man can be before deciding whether he's about to marry an alien queen, he replied with a faint smile. Then, after a pause, but that's not what scares me. What does? She asked gently. That I won't live up to what you deserve. Zara stepped closer, her voice steady. David, you have shown me more honesty, compassion, and partnership in 30 days than many show in a lifetime. You've challenged me, supported me, and treated me like a person rather than a throne. That is what I deserve. Her hand brushed his cheek, a gesture of deep affection in her culture. And for the record, I still think your proposal technique was terrible. He laughed, tension breaking. It really was. Yet, she said softly, it changed everything. They walked together to the main assembly hall, a vast crystalline chamber with thousands watching through holographic links. Representatives from Earth, Zarati nobles, and observers from allied species waited in respectful silence. High Chamberlain Veltrix stood at the center. According to imperial custom, he announced, 30 cycles of evaluation have passed. Today, the contract may be formalized or dissolved. Zara turned to him, expression unreadable. He held her gaze. Veltrix faced David first. Ambassador Park, do you choose to accept the contract of bonding with Her Majesty Queen Zaravel? This choice will make you co-equal ruler of the Zarati Empire and partner in all matters of life. David inhaled, feeling the weight of every decision, every conversation, every moment of connection they'd shared. High Chamberlain, he said, voice steady and clear. 30 days ago, I made a careless comment under starlight, not realizing the cultural impact. But since then, I've come to know Zara, not just as a monarch, but as someone remarkable, brilliant, and deeply human in all the ways that matter. Today, I choose her. Freely. A soft wave of shimmering light passed through the hall, the Zarati equivalent of applause. Veltrix turned to Zara. Your Majesty, do you accept Ambassador Park as your bonded partner and co-ruler? Zara stepped forward with calm authority. 30 days ago, David Park showed me a kindness I had rarely known, sincerity without agenda. Through these weeks, he has become not just a diplomatic partner, but someone whose presence strengthens my judgment and lightens my burdens. Her eyes warmed into brilliant amber. I choose him. Freely. Veltrix lifted his staff. Then by the authority of imperial law and the witness of 2 civilizations, I declare you bonded partners. A resonant harmonic sound filled the hall, the Zarati symbol of new beginnings. David barely had time to process the declaration before Zara leaned in and kissed him, gentle, respectful, but warm enough to silence every whisper in the hall. When they finally pulled apart, the celebration erupted around them. Humans cheering, Zarati humming in harmonic resonance, diplomats scrambling to update treaties and protocols. Later that night, they slipped away to the observation deck, where everything had started. Zara gazed at the stars. Any regrets? David laughed softly. About proposing to a queen by accident? About becoming co-ruler of an empire? About marrying someone from a species I barely understood? No, not one. She smiled, settling beside him the same way she had on that first night. Good, she murmured, because I need to tell you something. What now? he asked cautiously. The Velo wine, she said, looking far too smug for a queen. It is only served during formal courting settings. I selected that evening very carefully. David stared. Zara, did you set up the entire situation so I'd be more honest with you? I merely created an opportunity, she replied elegantly. Your heart did the rest. Manipulation, he accused playfully. Strategy, she corrected. Besides, it worked, didn't it? He sighed, leaning back beside her. Yeah, it worked. They sat in silence, watching stars drift past like slow-moving comets. Zara, he said finally, I think this might be the best accidental decision of my life. She intertwined her fingers with his. It wasn't accidental, David. It was inevitable. And as the ship carried them toward their future, co-rulers, unlikely lovers, partners forged by chance and choice, David realized one truth. Sometimes the universe doesn't wait for perfect plans. Sometimes it hands you the wrong words at the right time and changes your life forever.